The sound you just heard wasn't a celebration. It was the starting pistol for the complete and utter demolition of a billionaire's life. At a table overlooking the glittering lights of Chicago, Adrian Sterling, a titan of industry, raises a $2,000 bottle of Dom Perignon Rosé to toast his mistress. He whispers promises of a future, a new life, a world built just for them. But what he doesn't know is that miles away, in the cold silence of a lawyer's office, the woman carrying his unborn child has just put her pen down. With a single elegant signature, Isabella Vance Sterling hasn't just filed for divorce. She has activated a hidden clause in their ironclad prenup, a clause he never bothered to read. And in one devastating moment, she has legally seized control of his entire fortune. He's toasting his future, not knowing his past has already consumed it. Adrian Sterling didn't just live in Chicago, he owned a piece of its soul. His company, Sterling Enterprises, had its name etched onto skyscrapers that clawed at the clouds. His personal residence was a sprawling penthouse on Lakeshore Drive, a glass-and-steel eyrie with panoramic views of Lake Michigan that made the city look like a jeweled carpet laid out for his pleasure. The walls were adorned with art that wasn't just decorative, but strategic, a Rothko for intellectual heft, a Basquiat for raw power. Every object in the 10,000-square-foot space was a testament to his success, a monument to his ego. His wife, Isabella Vance Sterling, was often considered another one of his perfect acquisitions. She was the daughter of old money, possessing a quiet classical beauty and a degree in art history from Harvard that made her the perfect hostess. She could discuss Renaissance sculpture with the same effortless grace she used to manage a staff of 12. To the outside world, they were the ultimate power couple. His ruthless ambition balanced by her refined elegance. They were a feature in Town and Country, a name whispered with envy at charity galas, the embodiment of the Chicago dream. But inside the gilded cage, the gold was cold to the touch. Adrian saw Isabella not as a partner, but as a curator for his life. She managed the home, the social calendar, and his public image, all with a flawless efficiency that he simply expected. Their conversations had long ago dwindled from shared dreams to logistical briefings. "The fundraiser for the Art Institute is on Thursday, Adrian," she'd say, her voice calm and even as she adjusted a floral arrangement. "I've confirmed our table. You'll be seated next to Governor Hayes." "Good. Make sure my tuxedo is pressed, the one with the silk lapels," he'd reply, not looking up from the glowing screen of his tablet, where stock tickers scrolled like a digital waterfall. He spoke to her with the same clipped tone he used with his executive assistant. For 5 years, Isabella had played her part. She had mistaken his initial ambition for passion, his possessiveness for love. She had believed that beneath the armor of the corporate raider was a man she could build a life with. But the armor was all there was. He was a man who collected beautiful things, art, cars, companies, a wife, and expected them to remain flawless and silent. The loneliness was an entity in itself, a constant silent guest in their cavernous home. She'd walk through the marble hallways, her footsteps echoing in the silence, and feel like a ghost in her own life. The only warmth she found was in the small sunroom she had converted into her personal library, a place filled with books and plants that felt alive in a home that was otherwise a sterile museum. It was in that sunroom one crisp September afternoon that everything changed. For weeks, a subtle exhaustion had clung to her. A faint but persistent nausea greeted her each morning. She dismissed it as stress, but as she stood watering an orchid, a wave of dizziness so profound washed over her that she had to grip the back of a velvet armchair to steady herself. 2 hours later, she sat on the edge of her cold marble bathtub, staring at a small plastic stick in her trembling hand. A blue cross, unmistakable, pregnant. A surge of conflicting emotions crashed through her. There was a flicker of joy, primal and fierce, a baby, a life, a piece of her that wasn't owned or curated by Adrian, but it was immediately followed by a wave of cold dread. How could she bring a child into this emotional vacuum? What kind of father would Adrian be? A man who saw family as a legacy, a dynasty, not a source of love and warmth. She decided to tell him that evening. She arranged for his favorite meal to be prepared by their private chef, seared scallops, followed by a dry-aged ribeye. She chose a bottle of his preferred Bordeaux, a 1998 Chateau Margaux. She wanted everything to be perfect, a soft landing for the news she hoped would bridge the chasm between them. He arrived home late as usual, shrugging off his custom-made coat and tossing it to the housekeeper without a word. He walked into the dining room, loosening his tie. "Long day," he grunted, sitting at the head of the long polished table. "I understand," Isabella said softly. "I was hoping we could talk. Is it about the gala? Because I already told you I can't sit through another one of your cousin's rambling speeches." "No, it's not about the gala," she said, her hands clasped in her lap. "It's something important, something personal." The chef served the scallops. Adrian picked at his eyes already drifting back to the phone he had placed on the table beside him. "Just tell me, Isabella. I have an early call with the Tokyo office." Taking a deep breath, she looked directly at him, her heart pounding. "Adrian, I'm pregnant." The silence that followed was heavy and absolute. He stopped chewing. He slowly placed his fork down and looked at her. Truly looked at her for the first time all evening, but the expression in his eyes wasn't joy or shock or even curiosity. It was calculation. He leaned back in his chair, a slow, unreadable smile spreading across his face. "Well," he said finally, picking up his wineglass, "that's efficient." Isabella stared at him bewildered. "Efficient?" "Of course," he continued, swirling the deep red liquid. "The air. It secures the sterling legacy. Good timing, actually. We can announce it in the winter issue of Forbes. It's good for the brand." He took a sip of wine, his gaze distant, already planning the press release. He hadn't asked if she was okay. He hadn't asked if she was happy or scared. He hadn't reached for her hand. He had assessed the news as a business transaction, a strategic move that benefited his empire in that moment, watching him process the creation of their child as a public relations opportunity. The last fragile thread of hope Isabella had been clinging to snapped. The love she thought she had for him, the love she had been trying to revive for years, curdled into something else. It was a cold, hard certainty. She was not his wife. She was his asset, and now she was carrying his most valuable asset yet. The gilded cage had just become a nursery, and she knew with terrifying clarity that she had to find a way out, not just for herself, but for the tiny, innocent life growing inside her. Adrian Sterling's affair began, as many do, not with a thunderclap of passion, but with the quiet hum of mutual appreciation for beautiful, expensive things. The object of that appreciation was Veronica Vale. She wasn't a vapid model or a wide-eyed young intern. Veronica was a force of nature in her own right, the owner of a chic, minimalist art gallery in River North called Vale Contemporary. She was sharp, ambitious, and possessed a predator's instinct for weakness. She had dark, expressive eyes, a mane of raven hair. She wore it in a deliberately messy style, and a laugh that was low and smoky. She dressed in avant-garde European designs that made Isabella's classic Dior suits look quaint and matronly. Where Isabella was old money grace, Veronica was new money hunger. She didn't just sell art. She sold a lifestyle, an illusion of being on the cutting edge of culture, and men like Adrian were her primary clientele. They met when Adrian was looking to acquire a major piece by a rising German artist. Veronica handled the acquisition. She wasn't just a dealer. She was a connoisseur of men like him. She understood that for Adrian, art wasn't about emotion. It was about conquest and investment. During their initial meetings, she never flirted overtly. Instead, she engaged his intellect, his ego. She praised his discerning eye and his bold acquisition strategy. She spoke his language, the language of value, of scarcity, of owning something no one else could have. Most collectors are just decorating. She told him one afternoon in her gallery, a cavernous white space where a single unsettling sculpture stood in the center. They want something to match their sofa. You, Adrian, you're building a collection. You're shaping the market. He was hooked. Here was a woman who didn't just admire his wealth. She admired the mind that had built it. She saw him, he believed, as the visionary he saw himself as. Their professional meetings soon bled into personal ones. A discussion over a painting would turn into a long lunch at RPM Steak, where her hand would linger on his arm, a second too long. A late-night call about an auction would dissolve into intimate conversations about their ambitions. She created a world for him that was an antidote to the sterile perfection of his life with Isabella. With Veronica, he felt adventurous, rebellious. She'd take him to underground art shows in Wicker Park, to exclusive speakeasies he didn't know existed. She made him feel like he was still a hunter, not just a king sitting on his throne. The physical affair started on a business trip to Art Basel in Miami. In the humid, hedonistic atmosphere of the city, away from the prying eyes of Chicago society, they fell into bed. For Adrian, it was a release, a confirmation of his power and desirability. For Veronica, it was the closing of a deal that had been months in the making. She was the perfect mistress. She was demanding in a way that fed his ego, demanding expensive gifts, lavish trips, and exclusive access. But she never demanded the one thing he couldn't give legitimacy. She never complained about being the secret. In fact, she seemed to revel in it. "Poor Isabella," she'd say, with a smirk tracing the line of his jaw as they lay in a suite at the Peninsula Hotel. "Does she even know how to have fun, or does she just organize it?" Adrian would laugh, the comment stroking his justification for the affair. He told himself he wasn't destroying his marriage. He was simply supplementing it. Isabella was for legacy, for stability, for the public-facing brand of Adrian Sterling. Veronica was for him. She was his reward for the pressures of his life. He showered her with gifts. A rare Patek Philippe watch, a vintage convertible, a black American Express card with no limit linked to a private holding company to keep it off his main accounts. He was meticulous, he thought, in covering his tracks. He used burner phones, booked hotels under pseudonyms, and had his driver take convoluted routes. He was the master of his universe, and he believed he could compartmentalize his life with the same ruthless efficiency he applied to his business portfolio. He never once considered the emotional toll on Isabella because he had long since stopped seeing her as a person with a rich inner life. She was a system that worked. One doesn't worry about the feelings of a system, only its function. And as long as his home ran smoothly and his public appearances were flawless, he assumed the system was content. The announcement of Isabella's pregnancy barely registered as a complication to his affair. If anything, it made his compartmentalization feel even more justified. Isabella was now fulfilling her primary function, producing an heir. That was her world. His world, the one where he felt truly alive, was with Veronica. A week after he'd learned he was to be a father, he was with Veronica at her River North apartment, a loft space that was as sharp and stylish as she was. He had brought her a bottle of crystal champagne to celebrate the closing of a massive deal. "To us," Veronica purred, clinking her glass against his. "And to all the beautiful things we're going to acquire together." "To us," he repeated, his eyes dark with desire. He pulled her close, the city lights twinkling behind them. "I have a surprise for you. I'm taking you to Paris next month, a private suite at the Ritz." Her eyes lit up. This was what she wanted. The trips, the jewels, the proximity to power. She kissed him deeply, a calculated performance of passion. "And what will you tell the wife?" she whispered against his lips. "A business trip, a conference in Geneva," he said dismissively. "She doesn't ask questions. She knows her place." He believed it absolutely. He believed Isabella was at home contentedly planning a nursery, blissfully unaware of his other life. He saw himself as a master puppeteer, pulling the strings of his two separate worlds, never imagining that one of his puppets was about to cut her own strings and burn the entire stage to the ground. He was so confident in his deception, so blinded by his own arrogance that he never saw the first unraveling thread, and it was a thread he had left dangling himself a small, seemingly insignificant charge on a credit card statement, a charge for a gallery he thought his wife would never, ever have a reason to notice. Isabella had always been the one to manage their household finances. It was a role Adrian had delegated to her early in their marriage, not because he trusted her implicitly, but because he considered it tedious administrative work beneath his station. He gave her access to all their personal accounts, confident that her old money sensibilities would make her a responsible, if uninspired, steward of their domestic spending. It was a colossal miscalculation. He had mistaken her quiet diligence for a lack of curiosity. The first thread appeared on a Tuesday night. Adrian was in New York for a merger, and Isabella was in her study, the pool of light from her desk lamp, the only illumination in the dark penthouse. The baby was making its presence known with a persistent, gentle flutter, a secret conversation between mother and child. She was reviewing the monthly statement for their primary joint Amex account, a task she performed with meticulous care. She scanned the columns of figures Neiman Marcus, the private chef's services, a donation to the lyric opera, the usual rhythm of their opulent life. And then she saw it. A charge for $75,000. The vendor was listed as Vale Modern. Isabella paused. She knew every major art dealer in the city and beyond. She had never heard of this one. It was a significant amount too large for a casual purchase. Adrian hadn't mentioned acquiring a new piece. In fact, he'd recently complained about the art market being overvalued. Curiosity piqued. She opened her laptop and typed the gallery's name into the search bar. The website was sleek and aggressive, filled with the kind of abrasive conceptual art Adrian had always professed to hate. He called it pretentious junk. He favored established masters, blue-chip assets. This was completely out of character. The gallery's owner was listed as Veronica Vale. A photo showed a striking woman with dark, challenging eyes standing beside a sculpture that looked like a tangle of rusted metal. An uneasy feeling, cold and sharp, pricked at Isabella's heart. It was just a charge. It could be anything. A gift for a business associate, an investment he'd forgotten to mention. She tried to rationalize it, to push the suspicion away, but it was a loose thread on a perfect tapestry, and her fingers couldn't help but pull at it. Over the next few days, she started looking closer. She delved into accounts she hadn't reviewed in years, subsidiary accounts for his private holding companies, ones he used for discrete investments. She had to cross-reference tax IDs and wire transfer codes using the financial acumen her father, a savvy investor himself, had insisted she learn. What she found was a pattern. There wasn't just one charge, there were dozens stretching back over a year. Monthly wire transfers to a private account, all categorized under vague labels like consulting fees or acquisition services. There were charges from high-end jewelers. She'd never shopped at hotel bookings in cities where he had no business meetings, scheduled airline tickets for two that were never for her. And all of it seemed to orbit around one name, Veronica Vale. A charge for a floral arrangement delivered to the gallery's address, a payment to a luxury car service that listed the gallery as a frequent destination. The evidence was piling up, each discovery a small, sharp cut, but it was all circumstantial. Financial data could be explained away. Adrian was a master of plausible deniability. She knew she needed something irrefutable. She needed to see it. The decision to hire a private investigator felt like a betrayal of the woman she used to be, the woman who believed in privacy and trust. But that woman was gone, replaced by someone cold and clear-eyed. She found a discreet firm run by a former CPD detective named Thomas Sullivan, a man with a reputation for being thorough and invisible. She met him in a nondescript coffee shop in Logan Square, a world away from her Gold Coast life. She was dressed down, wearing sunglasses and a simple trench coat. "Mrs. Sterling," Sullivan said, his voice a low gravel. He didn't seem impressed by her name. "What can I do for you?" "I need you to follow my husband," she said, her own voice steady, surprising herself with its lack of tremor. I need to know where he goes and who he sees. She handed him a folder containing Adrian's schedule for the next 2 weeks. A week later, a plain manila envelope arrived via courier. Isabella took it into her sunroom, the one place that felt like hers, and sat down, her hands shaking. Inside were a dozen glossy 8x10 photographs. The first few were of Adrian entering the River North Gallery, then photos of him and Veronica Vale laughing over lunch at an outdoor cafe, her hand on his, their heads close together in shared intimacy. Another showed them leaving a hotel not in Miami or New York, but the Langham Hotel, less than 3 miles from their own home. And then the final photograph, the one that shattered everything. It was taken at night through the large window of Veronica's loft apartment. Adrian was standing behind her, his arms wrapped around her waist. He was kissing her neck, his eyes closed. Veronica was leaning back against him, a triumphant, possessive smile on her face as she looked at her reflection, and by extension, the camera's lens in the glass. It was a portrait of betrayal, stark and undeniable. Isabella let the photo slip from her fingers and scatter across the floor. She didn't cry. The pain was too deep, too vast for tears. It was a hollow, echoing chasm that opened up inside her. Every shared memory, every anniversary, every hopeful moment of their 5-year marriage was instantly recontextualized as a lie. His impatience, his dismissiveness, his emotional distance. It all made sense now. He hadn't been busy. He had been absent. He was living another life, a life he preferred, a life he had paid for, with their shared money and her stolen trust. She sat there for a long time, the silence of the penthouse pressing in on her. Her hand went instinctively to her stomach, to the gentle flutter that was now a steady, reassuring presence. She had been so naive. She had thought this child might be the glue that could repair the cracks in their marriage. Now she saw the truth. This child was not a bridge to him. This child was her anchor, her reason to escape. The hollow feeling began to recede, and in its place something new began to grow. It was not sorrow. It was not despair. It was a slow, burning, diamond-hard rage. He had called the news of their child efficient. He had reduced the most profound moment of her life to a line item on his legacy's balance sheet. He had stood in this very home under this roof and lied to her day after day while spending their fortune on his secret life. She stood up and walked over to the scattered photographs. She picked up the final one, the image of Adrian and Veronica in their embrace. She looked at his face, lost in his selfish pleasure, and hers smug with victory. They both thought they had won. They thought she was a fool, a decorative, oblivious wife. They had underestimated her. Everyone had always underestimated her. That was about to become the most expensive mistake Adrian Sterling had ever made. Isabella's grief was a crucible. It burned away the soft, forgiving parts of her and forged what was left into something sharp and unbreakable. The next morning she did not confront Adrian. There would be no tearful accusations, no screaming matches. That was the drama he would expect, a scene he could manage, manipulate, and ultimately dismiss. She was done playing scenes in his play. She was going to write her own ending. Her first call was not to a divorce lawyer, it was to Jonathan Pierce. Jonathan was a legend in certain circles of Chicago law, a name whispered with a mixture of fear and reverence. He wasn't a family law attorney who specialized in amicable splits. He was a shark, a specialist in forensic financial litigation and the weaponization of complex corporate contracts. He had a particular disdain for the brand of arrogant new money titans like Adrian Sterling, having once been ruined by one himself early in his career. He had since dedicated his life to dismantling them with surgical precision. They met in his office, a space that was the antithesis of Adrian's world. It was old, paneled in dark wood, and smelled of leather-bound books and quiet power. Jonathan Pierce was a man in his late 50s, with piercing gray eyes and an unnerving stillness. He listened without interruption as Isabella laid out her story, her voice a low, steady monotone. She concluded by placing the manila envelope of photographs on his polished desk. He glanced at the top photo, the one of the embrace, and pushed the envelope aside. He didn't need to see the rest. "Infidelity is predictable, Mrs. Sterling," he said, his voice dry. "In and of itself, it's a weak negotiating position in this state. The emotional damage is immense, but the financial leverage is minimal. What else do you have?" This was the moment. Isabella reached into her bag and retrieved a thick, bound document. "Our prenuptial agreement," she said, placing it on the desk. Jonathan leaned forward, his interest finally piqued. He opened the document, his sharp eyes scanning the dense pages. Adrian's lawyers, a team of aggressive corporate attorneys, had drafted it. It was on the surface an ironclad fortress designed to protect Adrian's vast fortune, which was estimated at just over $2 billion. It stipulated that in the event of a divorce, Isabella would receive a one-time payment of $10 million a pittance designed to buy her silence and a quick exit. Jonathan read through it, his expression grim. "This is brutal, Mrs. Sterling. It's designed to leave you with next to nothing." "Keep reading," Isabella said calmly. "Page 47, Article 12. Jonathan flipped to the page. His eyes narrowed as he read the clause, and then he read it again. A slow, wolfish grin spread across his face. He looked up at Isabella, seeing her for the first time, not as a victim, but as a fellow predator. "My God," he whispered, "the legacy clause." It was a piece of boilerplate language. Adrian's own lawyers had insisted on a standard edition for dynasty-building patriarchs. Adrian, obsessed with his own legacy, had wanted to ensure the moral and financial integrity of the Sterling bloodline. Article 12, the Fidelity and Family Progeny Clause, stated that the prenuptial agreement's primary terms would be rendered void under a specific set of circumstances. If the marriage produced a legitimate heir, and if Adrian Sterling was found to have engaged in marital infidelity that threatened the stability of the family unit during the gestation period of said heir, then an extraordinary measure would be triggered to protect the heir's birthright from the consequences of the father's moral instability, controlling interest in the Sterling Family Trust. The entity that held the majority of his shares in Sterling Enterprises, his real estate portfolio, and his liquid assets would be temporarily transferred to the mother to be held in stewardship until the child reached the age of 25. It was designed to protect a dynasty from a philandering father who might squander the family fortune on mistresses or illegitimate children. Adrian had signed it with an arrogant flourish, so confident in his own infallibility and his ability to deceive that he'd seen it as a testament to his own patriarchal virtue. He never imagined it could be used against him. He saw it as a shield for his heir. He never saw that Isabella would be the one to wield it as a sword. "He signed it," Isabella said, her voice like ice. "He was so proud of it. He called it ensuring the future." "This isn't just a divorce filing, Mrs. Sterling," Jonathan said, his mind racing, the thrill of the hunt in his eyes. "This is a corporate takeover, a coup d'etat. It's beautiful." For the next 4 weeks, they worked in absolute secrecy. Jonathan assembled a ghost team of forensic accountants and banking specialists. They operated out of a secure, unmarked office in a different borough. Their mission was to map out Adrian's entire financial empire. Every shell corporation, every offshore account, every hidden asset. They found the holding company used to fund his affair, the one linked to the Black Amex. They traced the wire transfers to Veronica Vale. They built an impenetrable mountain of evidence linking his infidelity directly to his financial assets, satisfying the clause's requirements perfectly. While they worked, Isabella played the most difficult role of her life. She was the perfect, glowing, expectant mother. She discussed nursery colors with Adrian, feigned interest in his tedious stories about board meetings, and accompanied him to a charity dinner, smiling placidly for the cameras, her hand resting on her gently swelling abdomen. It was a masterful performance. The closer she got to the date, the more serene she appeared. Her calmness unnerved Adrian, though he couldn't say why. He mistook her quiet resolve for contentment. The plan was a symphony of legal and financial maneuvers timed to the minute. They couldn't just file a motion. The moment Adrian was alerted, he would move his assets, hide them in a web of international accounts so dense they'd spend years litigating. The transfer of control had to be instantaneous and absolute. Jonathan Pierce prepared a series of documents. They weren't divorce papers. They were framed as a standard update to the Sterling family trust, something a responsible father-to-be would do to streamline his estate for his coming child. There were dozens of pages of dense legalese, but buried deep within them were the trigger documents, the execution of the powers granted by Article 12, the irrevocable transfer of voting rights for his shares, and the legal appointment of Isabella as the sole trustee. "He'll never read it," Isabella stated not as a question, but as a fact. "Men like him never do." Jonathan agreed. They see a stack of papers from their own lawyers, and all they see is their own power reflected back at them. They sign because they believe they are untouchable. The date was set, a Thursday, the day of the Art Institute fundraiser he was so annoyed about. Isabella knew he would be distracted, his mind on the evening's boring pleasantries, and no doubt on whatever plans he had with Veronica for later. The day before, Isabella went for her obstetrician appointment. She lay in the darkened room, the cool gel on her stomach, and watched the grainy black and white image on the screen. A tiny, perfect spine. A head, the frantic, powerful beat of a tiny heart. Tears streamed down her face, the first tears she had shed in a month. They weren't tears of sadness or anger. They were tears of fierce, protective love. "I'm doing this for you," she whispered to the image on the screen. "You will never be just an asset. You will be safe. You will be free." She was no longer just escaping. She was building a fortress for her child. The day of the signing was a masterpiece of orchestrated banality. The weather was a placid, indifferent blue, the kind of autumn day in Chicago that feels full of promise. For Adrian Sterling, the promise was of an evening that would begin with a tedious but necessary appearance at the Art Institute Gala and end in the arms of Veronica Vale. For Isabella, it was the promise of liberation. She woke early, a quiet hum of energy beneath her calm exterior. She chose her outfit with deliberate care, a simple but elegant cream-colored cashmere dress. It was modest, maternal, and utterly non-threatening. It was the costume for the final act of her performance as the beautiful Mrs. Sterling. Adrian was, as predicted, in a foul mood. He stood before his closet, a vast wood-paneled room larger than most Chicago apartments, scowling at his collection of tuxedos. "I hate this event," he grumbled, pulling one out. "All those preening peacocks and stale conversation." "It's 4 hours I'll never get back. It's important for the brand," Isabella said softly, walking in. "And you look so handsome when you're there." She adjusted the knot on the tie he hadn't yet put on a small wifely gesture that seemed to soothe his ego. "I suppose," he conceded. "Just make sure we leave the moment it's acceptable. I have an early morning." It was his standard lie for a night with Veronica. "Of course, dear," she replied, her smile never wavering. Later that afternoon, at precisely 3 p.m., Isabella walked into Adrian's home office. It was his sanctuary, a room of dark leather, polished chrome, and a singular, imposing desk that looked like a slab of black marble. He was on a conference call, pacing and barking orders. He gestured for her to wait, holding up one finger, annoyed at the interruption. Isabella sat in one of the visitors' chairs, her leather portfolio clutched in her lap. She waited patiently for 10 minutes, projecting an aura of someone with nothing more important to do than await her husband's convenience. Inside her heart, hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird beating against the cage of her chest. This was the most critical moment. If he balked, if he decided to read, if even a flicker of suspicion crossed his mind, the entire plan would collapse. Finally, he slammed the phone down. "What is it, Isabella? I'm swamped." "I'm so sorry to bother you, darling," she began, her voice, gentle and apologetic. "It's just, the lawyers sent these over. They said you needed to sign them before the end of the day." She opened her portfolio and laid the thick stack of documents on his desk. On top was a cover letter from the senior partner at his own trusted law firm, a man Adrian had on a multi-million-dollar retainer. Jonathan Pierce had brilliantly anticipated this, convincing a junior and deeply indebted associate at the firm to generate the letterhead and a boilerplate summary. The summary described the documents as the Sterling Heir Provisionary Trust, an update to safeguard assets for your unborn child. Adrian glanced at the cover letter, his eyes scanning the familiar logo. He grunted in acknowledgement. Right. The trust update? I'd forgotten. He picked up the stack, weighing it in his hand, his expression one of extreme impatience. He clearly had no intention of reading it. They're just formalities mostly, Isabella said, keeping her tone light and casual. Standard procedure for establishing the baby's inheritance, but they marked the pages you need to sign. She had, with Jonathan's instruction, placed bright yellow "Sign Here" stickers on the appropriate signature lines, making it as easy and thoughtless as possible. She was treating him like a busy celebrity signing autographs, not a billionaire signing away his empire. He flipped through the pages, his eyes glazing over at the dense blocks of text. He saw trust, legal, asset schedules, appendixes. It looked exactly like every other tedious corporate document he signed a dozen times a week. His mind was already elsewhere, on the speech he had to avoid at the gala, on the reservation he'd made at a private club for him and Veronica at 11 p.m. He reached for his pen, a heavy custom Mont Blanc. Fine. Where do I sign? Isabella stood and leaned over the desk, her scent a subtle, familiar lavender filling the air. She pointed a perfectly manicured finger at the first yellow tab. Here and here. He signed the first page his signature, a sharp, arrogant slash of ink. She turned the page for him, and here he signed again. With each stroke of the pen, a new wire in his vast financial web was severed from him and reconnected to her. The voting rights to his majority stake in Sterling Enterprises, the deeds to their properties in the Hamptons, Aspen, and St. Bart's, the control codes for his primary investment accounts, ///. As he signed the final page, the one that enacted the power of Article 12 and made all the other transfers legally binding and irrevocable, Isabella felt a profound, dizzying sense of vertigo. It was done. The trap had been sprung. He was still the king, but he was sitting on a throne that no longer belonged to him. He pushed the stack of papers back across the desk towards her. There, all set. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to prepare for this dreadful party. He stood up already, dismissing the moment the papers and her from his mind. He was completely unaware that he had just executed his own financial demise. Thank you, Adrian, Isabella said, her voice impossibly serene. She gathered the documents, the ink still wet on his signature, and placed them carefully back into her portfolio. I'll have the courier send these back to the lawyers immediately. You go get ready. I'll see you downstairs in an hour. He nodded and walked out of the room without a backward glance. Isabella stood alone in his office, the portfolio clutched to her chest. She looked around the room at the symbols of his power, the trophies of his conquests. They were hers now. She walked to the floor-to-ceiling window and looked down at the city sprawling below. It was no longer his kingdom that she was a prisoner in. It was her dominion, one not with brute force, but with the quiet, underestimated intelligence of a woman he had never bothered to truly see. A silent, seismic shift had just occurred, and the only person in the world who knew was the one he had wronged the most. The air in the restaurant was thick with the scent of money and ambition. Adrian had chosen Alinea, a temple of modern American cuisine in the Fulton Market District, for his rendezvous with Veronica. It was a place for celebrating victories, a room where hushed billion-dollar deals were sealed over plates of meticulously crafted food. He had skipped out of the Art Institute gala at the earliest possible moment, leaving Isabella to make his excuses, pleading a sudden migraine. The lie had rolled off his tongue with practiced ease. He sat across from Veronica in a plush, secluded booth, the city lights a dazzling backdrop. She was wearing a blood-red dress that clung to her like a second skin, a stark contrast to the sea of muted elegance she knew Isabella would be wearing. I hate that I had to see you with her tonight, Veronica pouted, swirling a ruby-red Cabernet in her glass. even from across the room, standing there all maternal and smug. "It's just for show, you know," Adrian said, reaching across the table to take her hand. His touch was proprietary, reassuring, a necessary evil. But the show is almost over. This was the lie he had been telling her for months, the carrot he dangled to ensure her compliance, the promise of a future where Isabella was a footnote. "Is it, Adrian?" she asked, her dark eyes searching his. "Because that belly of hers is getting rather prominent." "That," he said, leaning in and lowering his voice, "is a complication, but it's also an opportunity. It changes the timeline, but the outcome is the same, you and me." To punctuate his promise, he signaled the sommelier. "Bring us the 2008 Dom Perignon Rosé," he ordered, not even glancing at the wine list. It was a gesture of casual, immense wealth. At that exact moment, 9:53 p.m., miles downtown in Jonathan Pierce's wood-paneled office, Isabella sat at a large conference table. The signed documents lay before her, now scanned and digitized. Jonathan was on a secure line with a senior compliance officer at a private bank in Switzerland. 2 forensic accountants were poised over their laptops, ready to execute a complex series of wire transfers. "The authorization codes are authenticated," Jonathan said, nodding to Isabella. "We are green lit. We go live on my mark." Isabella took a deep, steadying breath. Her hand rested on her stomach. This was it, the point of no return. "Mark," she said, her voice clear and strong. Back at Alinea, the sommelier arrived with the champagne. The bottle, a pale, shimmering pink, was presented to Adrian for his approval. He nodded curtly, and the cork was eased out with a soft, expensive sigh. As the first drops of pink champagne splashed into Veronica's crystal flute, a team of IT specialists contracted by Jonathan executed a digital command. Adrian Sterling's biometric and password credentials for the Sterling Enterprises servers were instantly revoked. The digital keys to his own kingdom were now invalid. The sommelier moved to Adrian's glass. As the champagne filled it, a second command was executed. The irrevocable transfer of voting control of his majority shares, authorized by his own signature, was filed electronically with the company's board and the SEC. On paper, he was still the CEO. In reality, he was a figurehead who could be removed at any moment by the new majority shareholder, his wife. Adrian raised his glass. The champagne fizzed, the tiny bubbles catching the light. He looked at Veronica, a woman he saw as his vibrant, exciting future. "A toast," he said, his voice resonant with self-satisfaction. "To new beginnings, to a future free of tedious obligations. To us." As their glasses clinked a high, clear note in the restaurant's murmur, the final series of transfers began. Liquid assets, hundreds of millions of dollars in cash, stocks, and bonds, were moved from accounts controlled by Adrian into new trust accounts controlled solely by Isabella. The titles for the properties were legally transferred. The credit lines he used to fund his lavish lifestyle, including the black Amex in Veronica's wallet, were frozen pending review by the new account controller. He took a long, satisfying sip of the champagne. It was crisp, complex with notes of strawberry and smoke. It tasted to him like victory. He was a master of the universe, celebrating another successful manipulation, another perfectly managed duality. He was toasting his own brilliance, his power, his ability to have everything he wanted. He had no idea he was drinking to his own ruin. He was celebrating at his own wake and didn't even know he was the corpse while he savored the taste of expensive wine and the company of his mistress. The empire he had built. The fortune that defined him was being systematically and legally dismantled in complete silence. The entire structure of his life had been demolished, and he was sitting in the rubble admiring the view, completely oblivious to the fact that nothing he was looking at belonged to him anymore. The toast was a perfect final monument to his own spectacular arrogance. The first tremor of Adrian's collapsed world came not as a roar, but as a whisper of digital embarrassment. After the lavish dinner, After more champagne and whispered promises, he reached for his wallet to pay the bill. He handed the waiter his personal Centurion card, the legendary black card that was his ultimate symbol of unlimited power. A few moments later, the waiter returned his expression, a careful mask of professional apology. "I'm very sorry, Mr. Sterling." "The card has been declined." Adrian stared at him. "That's impossible. Run it again." "We have, sir, 3 times. Perhaps there is another card you'd like to use." A flush of irritation crept up Adrian's neck. He pulled out a platinum visa from another bank. "Try this one." The waiter returned again, his face even more pained. "My apologies, sir. This one as well." Veronica watched, her smile tightening. The glamour of the evening was evaporating under the harsh fluorescent light of a financial problem. Adrian, flustered and furious, pulled out his phone to call the bank's private concierge line. He was put on hold. The triumphant master of the universe was now listening to tinny hold music like any other mortal. Finally, a nervous-sounding junior agent came on the line. "Mr. Sterling, yes, I see the issue. There appears to be a hold on all your personal accounts. A directive was issued from the primary trustee." "I am the primary trustee," Adrian hissed into the phone. "Our records show a change in trustee status effective as of 9:53 p.m. this evening, sir. The new primary trustee is listed as Isabella Vance Sterling." The name hit him like a physical blow. It made no sense. It was a mistake, a clerical error. He ended the call, threw enough cash on the table to cover the bill, one of the few times he'd carried that much, and stormed out of the restaurant, Veronica trailing behind him, her expression now one of cold assessment. "What was that about, Adrian?" she asked as they stood on the curb, the city air suddenly chilly. "It's nothing, a bank error," he snapped, trying to access his Sterling Enterprises corporate account on his phone to summon his driver. Access denied. He tried again. Invalid credentials. Panic. An emotion he hadn't felt since he was a young man clawing his way up began to snake its way into his gut. He hailed a common yellow cab, a humiliation in itself. During the tense, silent ride to Lakeshore Drive, he frantically tried to call his CFO, his lawyer, anyone. All his calls went straight to voicemail. It was as if he had been digitally excommunicated from his own life. When the cab pulled up to his building, the final devastating blow landed. He strode towards the grand entrance, but the doorman, a man who had greeted him by name for years, stepped forward to block his path, his face a picture of misery. "I'm sorry, Mr. Sterling. I can't let you up." "What the hell are you talking about, Michael? I live here." "My instructions are clear, sir. From the new primary leaseholder, Mrs. Sterling, you're no longer listed as a resident." This was it. The moment the fog of denial was blasted away by the brutal light of reality. This wasn't an error. This was an attack. This was a coup. Veronica, who had been watching this all unfold, took a slow step back. The man she had attached herself to, the titan of industry, the font of unlimited resources, was being locked out of his own home. His power had vanished. She saw him not as a lover, but as a stock that had just crashed to zero. "Adrian," she said, her voice devoid of any warmth. I think I should go." She didn't wait for a reply. She turned, hailed another cab, and disappeared into the Chicago night, taking his illusions of a shared future with her. Adrian was left alone on the sidewalk, the city lights that once seemed to celebrate him now mocking his powerlessness. Humiliated and enraged, he finally got a text message. It was from a number he didn't recognize. "Your belongings have been packed and sent to a storage unit in Queens. The address will be forwarded to you. Here is the number for a hotel I've booked for you for the next week. After that, you are on your own. A letter is waiting for you with the concierge. I." He stumbled into the lobby where the concierge silently handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope bearing the elegant IVS monogram. He tore it open. Inside, in Isabella's perfect looping script, was a multi-page letter. It was not emotional or angry. It was a calm, detailed, and devastating summary of his ruin. It outlined his infidelity, referencing dates and locations from the private investigator's report. It explained in clear, simple terms the function of Article 12 of their prenuptial agreement, the clause he had never bothered to read. It informed him that she had assumed full control of the Sterling family trust, and by extension the company and all their assets, to protect the birthright of their unborn child from a father of compromised judgment. The letter ended with a final soul-crushing paragraph. "You once told me that my pregnancy was efficient and good for the brand. You were right. It has proven to be the most efficient business transaction of my life. You saw our child as an heir to your empire. Instead, this child has become the instrument of my liberation and your downfall. You underestimated me, Adrian. You saw me as another beautiful object you owned. You will find that of all your acquisitions, I was the only one that had a mind of its own. Do not try to contact me. All future correspondence will be through our lawyers, or rather my lawyers and whomever you can afford to hire." He crumpled the letter in his fist, his body trembling with a rage so profound it left him breathless. He had been utterly, completely, and perfectly defeated. He had been dismantled not by a corporate rival or a market crash, but by the quiet, unassuming woman he had relegated to the background of his life. She had used his own arrogance, his own legal documents, and his own child against him in a maneuver so brilliant and ruthless it was something he would have admired in an enemy. He looked up through the glass doors of the lobby, up at the penthouse where the lights were on. He could almost imagine her standing there, a hand on her stomach, looking down at him. Isabella Vance Sterling, the curator of his life, had just curated his spectacular destruction. He had nothing left but the expensive clothes on his back and the bitter taste of champagne in his mouth. He had toasted his future, never realizing he was already a ghost of the past. And so Adrian Sterling's world ended not with a bang, but with a quiet signature and the pop of a champagne cork. It's a chilling reminder that the greatest threats often come not from our declared enemies, but from the people we underestimate the most. Isabella's story is one of incredible strength, a transformation from a silent partner into the architect of her own justice. It leaves us with a powerful question. Is this a story of cold-hearted revenge, or is it a story of radical self-preservation? Was Isabella's coup a masterclass in karma or a cautionary tale about the devastating power of secrets? Adrian lost a fortune, but in the end, what he truly lost was the respect and love of a woman who was worth more than his entire empire. What do you think? Let us know in the comments below. If you found this story of betrayal and brilliant revenge as captivating as we did, please give this video a thumbs up, share it with someone who loves a story of epic karma, and make sure you subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell. You won't want to miss the next real-life drama we uncover.